Hi, folks. I'm here with Seth David, one of my mentors, the original accounting YouTuber. I learned a lot of stuff about QuickBooks, Excel, and general accounting bookkeeping knowledge from Seth when I got started over 10 years ago. So Seth has his YouTube channel called Nerd Enterprises, and also he's developed what I think is the best bookkeeping course for QuickBooks Online users that is out there. So I want to bring him in, pick his brain about how he came about putting this course together, the methodology that he uses, and maybe ask him some questions about how to get started in the bookkeeping industry overall. If you just basically becoming a bookkeeper, becoming an outsourced bookkeeper, and what's sort of the best way to fast track into the practical things that you need to know in order to get started. So Seth, hey, welcome.
Hey, thank you, Hector. Thank you for having me.
So Seth, let me ask you the first question. You have a specific methodology that you use, which you call Bulletproof Bookkeeping, and that's what you based your QuickBooks Online bookkeeping course on. Could you explain to us why that's different?
Sure. I mean, it actually goes back a number of years to, after I had first started my own business, and then for a period of time, I actually went to work for somebody. And it goes back to a conversation I remember having with somebody back then about getting a business, quote unquote, bulletproof, right? And the idea, the sort of imagery of that really kind of resonated with me in terms of the fact that when you look at it from the bookkeeping perspective, what that really means, it's, you think of bulletproof, you think of something that's impenetrable. And really what that translates to in terms of the bookkeeping is that in the simplest form, it means I can prove every single number on every financial statement in that set of books. And a lot of people might listen to that and think, well, isn't that how it should be? And the reality is no, it more often than not is not that solid, that a lot of times the numbers are, what you might describe as, quote, good enough, right? I can get a tax return filed. But this really means if I was under the scrutiny, the most extreme scrutiny, let's say, of an audit, that auditor could pick any account and ask me for the detail. I can list them the detail, and they can pick any random sampling of expense line items within that detail, and I can produce the documentation to support that the transaction exists, that it happened in the period, the cutoff that I recorded it in, that it happened in the amount that it's stated in the books. All the criteria that we think of when we think of what are called the management assertions, which refers to what we're really saying about the financial position of the company when we present somebody with a balance sheet and a profit and loss. It means I can prove every number.
So Seth, I'm a CPA and a tax preparer, and oftentimes I get hired just to prepare a tax return, and my client doesn't have an internal bookkeeper or a bookkeeping service or doesn't want to pay for the bookkeeping work. I can tell you firsthand that sometimes because we're hired to do just that, that's just the work that we do a couple of adjustments, a couple of journal entries, just get the tax returns out. So there's a low probability that if there's an audit, there will be a big dollar change in the audit process. However, it does make the audit process a lot more complicated because oftentimes the IRS is looking at a line in the tax return and tells me, okay, how did you arrive to $17,275 of travel? And if we're making journal entries, we have no real justification for it, and we have to say, hey, that's the information the client gave us. But when you are a bookkeeper, an outsourced bookkeeper, an in-house bookkeeper, and you're being hired to do this, it is sort of a minimal expectation that your client will have or your boss will have that every line item in the financial statement can be justified, correct?
Yes, and I mean, honestly, yes and no. I mean, I think there's a certain extent to which you expect it's like we talk about in audit terms, and all of this really comes from my background, specifically as an auditor, which is what I did when I first got out of college. Worked as an auditor for a federal government program, and then eventually I worked, after I had started my own company, I worked for about a year or two through a CPA firm just by contract, and I was an in charge on their audits. So I got to see it from that perspective as well. And there's different levels of sort of scrutiny that you can put a set of books through. There's what we call a compilation, which provides minimal assurance about the accuracy of the financial information. It basically means we took what management gave us and we put together a P&L and a balance sheet. We didn't really do any testing to verify the accuracy of the numbers. Then you have what's called a review, right? which is in between a compilation and an audit, where we provide what I believe the language and the opinion that gets issued, what it says specifically is we provide limited assurance about the reasonableness and how fairly stated the financial position of the company is. And then there's an audit, which is the most assurance, but even that isn't 100%. There's only so much testing you can do. When you prepare a tax return, you can only do so much testing to verify the numbers, or you'd be spending all year on one tax return potentially, right? So it's just different levels of assurance. And so when I refer to Bulletproof Books, it really refers to two things, and I want to make this clear. One is the documentation, which is how I can prove every number and all the five pieces in terms of the assertions, what you're saying about the financial statements when you put a number on them. But it also refers to how the transactions are recorded, right? Because that can make a huge difference. And just to give you a quick example, I recently used this example where, let's say I'm auditing or just verifying. And by the way, because where this comes from, forgetting about the audit, in the real world of practicing as a bookkeeper who's doing books for clients, where it's going to come up almost immediately is your own client's going to scrutinize the work you did on their set of books. They're going to say, these numbers don't look right, and I need you to prove them, right? And you need to be prepared to be able to prove them. You should be able to stand behind your work, right? The ultimate output of a bookkeeper's work are the financial statements that get produced. And I think a lot of people forget that. They don't think about that. They only think as far as entering the transactions. They don't really think about the output. And the output's important, and that's what we've got to be able to prove. So I give the example of, if let's say I've got a company that has commissions as an integral part of their business model, right? And let's say I have a customer who deducted money from my sale to them, right? In other words, they're a customer of mine, but they also get paid a commission. So they didn't pay me the full amount they owed me for what I did for them because they deducted a piece of it to take back their own commission on it, right? There's several different ways I could record that, all of which would be accurate, all of which would get me to the right number for commission expense. But without going into all the gory details here, I can't really share my screen and really go into it. Just sort of simplifying everything. The way that I record that transaction, that commission they withheld, matters because later on, if I'm auditing that commissions expense account, and I'm looking at a list of transactions, and there's a column that shows me the transaction type. And I see for the transaction type, and if you know QuickBooks Online lingo, there's an expense, which is basically, or a check, which is basically money going out of the bank account, right? Or there could be bills, right? And the way that a lot of people would have recorded that deduction on the money I received from them might have been to reduce it right in the deposit and book that straight to commission expense. Again, not wrong, but when I'm auditing that account, what I'm going to see is bill, expense, deposit. It's going to stand out, and even though it's right, it's going to call attention to it, and that's exactly not what you want when you're trying to prove expenses and being scrutinized. You don't want things to stand out. In marketing, you want to stand out. In auditing books and verifying numbers, you want things that don't stand out. You want everything to look the way one would expect. You want to show people what they would expect to see, and that's a good example, I think, of where something will stand out. It's not wrong, but it's going to cause you to have to take time to explain it to somebody that you'd rather not have to do. So you take the extra time, run it through a clearing account, so ultimately there's just a bill or an expense in that account instead of deducting it directly out of a deposit. And anybody who has experience with this stuff knows what I'm talking about. But the bottom line is, and my point in all that is, it has more to do than just, there's more to it than just having the documentation that backs up the expense. It's how you record things that makes a huge difference in that conversation that you will invariably have to have with that business owner when they say, I don't think that number is right. Can you show me how you got that number, right? And that's where it's going to come up first.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to get you to show your screen soon so you can show a clip of one of the videos so we can kind of get an idea for what that looks like. But let me ask you another question, Seth, and actually let me summarize what you said from what I understand. So if you are a CPA, a bookkeeper with great reputation, you could probably get away with making adjustments, showing financial statements that are quote unquote accurate. The business owner, the user of the reports will probably be happy. But if you're just getting started and you're trying to build reputation for a quality bookkeeper, a quality accounting professional, you have to do the bookkeeping in a very specific way. So if anyone's going to scrutinize it and question the quality of the work, you can click, and pull it on the screen, and all the transactions are natural. They don't stand out. They look like they're supposed to be there. And most importantly, they don't look like a plug or an adjustment, which is an accounting term which we use to basically explain things that are difficult to explain through natural transactions and documentation. So Seth, before we show a clip of what your course looks like, let me ask you a question about general education. So you got started X amount of years ago. I got started 12 years ago. I remember all the different trials and tribulations for me to find the right education for me. If you're going to be not a CPA necessarily, but you're going to be in the bookkeeping world, either you just got a job in a company, you're going to get a job in a company, or are going to offer bookkeeping services. And let's say you don't have an accounting degree. What is the fastest track in terms of education to learn that's fundamental skill that you need to be both a bookkeeper and a QuickBooks bookkeeping professional?
All right, so being very, very honest, the fastest track is getting experience, right? Getting a client in the door and learning on that client. And maybe it takes being honest with that client and saying, hey, I'm just getting started out, so I'm flying under the radar, I'm going to be less expensive, and I'm going to learn on you. And that's kind of how I actually started out. You know, I had an advantage because I had an accounting degree. You know, so I had some real world experience, but not doing bookkeeping for small businesses. I worked for the government as an auditor. I worked for a big publicly traded company, and then I worked for a CPA firm all before I started my business. So I had a good sort of set of experience going into this. For somebody who doesn't have that, for somebody who's really just kind of going into this without any experience and background and wants to start a career in bookkeeping, I would say get experience first and foremost. It might mean getting a job first, but if you're, for whatever reason, not inclined to do that, then get your first client. Try and make it a simple service-based business so you can really, because ultimately at the end of the day, the way I learned to do this stuff, even with all that experience, I didn't know how to do that specifically, but it was taking the accounting fundamentals that I understood and plugging those fundamentals into any business model. And I also learned early on that by actually listening to the business owner, imagine that, and having them explain to me their operations and their day-to-day and their business model, in my mind, I could visualize what the accounting on this should look like. As they're explaining to me how they get their customers and how a sale is made, I'm thinking, okay, so this is an invoice because they're making a sale, they're getting paid for it later. Or if it's a retail store, I'm thinking, okay, the sale is made on the spot. There's not an invoice, there's a sales receipt. I'm literally converting their language, describing their operations, into what it looks like in the accounting, and doing that in my brain all while I'm talking to them. And so I try and get them talking as much as possible. That's probably the best place to start. But then I know what you're really asking about, Hector, is, you know, educational resources, right? And I'm assuming somebody starting out might be on a budget. And as you and I both very well know, because we've substantially provided it, there's lots of free stuff on YouTube that you can go out and look up. You can search YouTube for different subjects and learn, how do I record an NSF check? I always bring that example up because it's like one of the first videos that I did that really got some traction. And the response that I got to it was what made me realize I was onto something here in terms of creating videos. But the point is, you can search for a lot of subjects and get free information. But there's going to also come a point in time where you have a very specific use case, and the videos that are generic on YouTube aren't going to be enough, right? So maybe you have somebody who can work with you one-on-one. That's a big part of what I do, is, you know, the one-on-one training that I do with people. And that's one way, but that's not cheap. If you're on a budget, that's not going to be the best solution. Or there's frankly courses. I mean, that's why I wrote the Bulletproof Bookkeeping course, is I really wanted to create the quintessential resource that went from A to Z and gave somebody, both experienced and not, but everything they needed in a resource to be able to learn whatever they needed to learn. And then what I've included in that is the community, which is just a complement to what you already have in the course itself, in terms of the fact that you can comment on anything by way of asking questions, and I get back to people and provide the answers. So in theory, there's nothing you should really ever get stumped on. You know, if you come into me and start asking about something like factoring receivables, which is very complicated, then I might have to suggest a one-on-one session. It's going to be hard to explain all that in a comment on a lesson in a video course. But keeping things within reason, you know, it's a resource I built for that reason. And I'm not the only one. Of course, I would love for people to sign up for my course, but there's lots of resources out there to take a look at and consider.
Now, the Bulletproof Bookkeeping course, the one that you've built, how many total hours of, let's just do watch time, is it at the moment?
So what I did actually, because I knew people were going to want to know that, was I logged it all in an Airtable database. And so right now, the exact running time aggregated across all videos is 13 hours, 12 minutes, and 48 seconds.
All right. So right now it's a 13-hour course, and I know you're adding a couple more lessons as QuickBooks gets updated and new things come along. But that number, the 13 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours, that's sort of a false number that people look at. The longer the course and the shorter the course doesn't necessarily, the better, right? What makes a course good, high quality course?
I think, well, first of all, I think one of the things that I did in designing this course specifically was that 13 hours is broken up into bite-sized chunks. And I did that for two reasons. One, because sometimes I know that people are they're on the fly and they just need to learn one quick, narrow thing, which means design this way. You can find the one thing you need to brush up on or learn, go through it, watch the video. Some of the videos are only 6 minutes, some of them are an hour, and everything in between. The point is you can find exactly what you're looking for, learn or review that one thing, and then get back to work. So it's designed to be able to use that way as a permanent resource, which, by the way, is why I decided to price it with lifetime access instead of a subscription, so you're not essentially writing a blank check and not knowing what it's really going to cost you. But the other thing is it's also designed that you could go through it sequentially. So if you're really starting from scratch and don't know what you're doing yet, and this is the other thing that makes a great course, is there has to be a logical sequence to it. And there is. It's been very well thought out, and that's why I start you with the bank feeds in this course, because if you're doing accounting with cloud accounting software in this day and age, the bank feeds are really the core of all of it. It really has to start there. I honestly don't even bother with how to set up a company file in QuickBooks Online, because to me, in all honesty, it's filling out forms and walking through a very straightforward interview. I don't think I really needed to explain to people how to do that. And there's plenty of videos on YouTube that will show you in case you do get stuck there.
And the 13 hours based on videos is not all of it, right? Because what you're probably going to suggest people to do, and correct me if I'm wrong, is to watch the video, have a QuickBooks Online sample file next to it, and just kind of like stop and go, follow along to make sure it sinks in, correct?
In fact, throughout many of the videos, at many points I stop and say, if you haven't been doing this already, make sure you get either a sample file or the QBO test drive company open so you can practice what I'm showing you, because that's the only way it's really going to sink in.
So if you were going to dedicate 1 hour a day to learning Bulletproof Bookkeeping with QuickBooks Online with your course, how long more or less you think it'll take for someone to get through the entire course?
Obviously,
practice time.
Yeah, obviously it depends on the person. But here's the way I would actually approach that sort of question, is what I would suggest to people, if you're the person that's really looking to start from A and go to Z through the course, plan on one lesson a day, right? And then some lessons will take you an hour. Some lessons might take you 2 hours, even though the running time of the video is shorter, because you're going to be practicing things. So to answer your question specifically, I would say plan on 2 hours per lesson. In reality, it's probably not going to take that much. But what I would do, rather than look at it from that standpoint, is just plan on doing one lesson a day. Right? And if you do, and that's kind of how this course was designed also. Originally, I was going to roll it out in what's called a drip campaign, where on day one when you sign up, you get the first lesson, and then each day it adds another lesson. But then I realized there were going to be people who, like I just said, they're looking for that one specific thing that they need to review, and I don't want to make them wait so many days to get that, right? So I said, nope, I'm going to give you the whole thing at once. But the point is that it was designed that way. It was designed that if you're not using it as a reference resource at this time, but you're using it to actually learn sequentially, then just do one lesson a day. If the need arises, you can always jump ahead to something that specifically addresses, like there's a very in-depth lesson on how to record loans in QuickBooks, and specifically how I do that and why I do it the way that I do it. And it's not necessarily the traditional way that people do it. And so maybe that's the one I'll show everybody real quick when we want to take a look at something.
That's perfect. And one thing I like to mention, when I purchased a course for one of my employees, one of the things that they told me they really liked is that they can search. So like you said, maybe you're going sequentially, but you're in the middle of working with a client and you're like, how do I close out retained earnings? How do I close out income to equity, whatever? And then people can just search it and go straight to that lesson. So there's the pros and the cons, I guess, of showing everything on one shot instead of forcing people to take it sequentially, is that they could get distracted by looking at something later on in the future, but also you can help them find an answer. So let's go ahead and get you set up to share your screen so you can show us one of the lessons.
All right, I am going to share my screen with. Okay, so Hector, because you mentioned about searching for things, what I did was I quickly dragged over my a catalog of what's in the course that I've done in Airtable, and of course it's all laid out nicely, and I'll show you in a second in the website itself. But I thought this proved to be very useful, and a lot of the people who've signed up have agreed, and this is available to everyone, that it's broken down here by section. You can certainly search within this. And I can expand a section here, and it's got the links directly to the lesson, and it also shows you the video duration. So if you're looking at something and you're doing what I suggested on day one, you know, the first video is only 9 minutes and it's just connecting your bank accounts, maybe you'll do 2 lessons that day because it's easy enough to do, and maybe you'll stick in this other 3-minute lesson, right? So you can easily go through this, and you can use this catalog to see exactly how long something is and find things that way too. And Airtable has a nice little search feature in and of itself. Right.
And does the course mark him completed as you go? Does it mark him done so you know exactly what you've done so far?
It actually gives you a button, and I'll show you this. It gives, so if I go into, here are the sections, right? These are the major sections, and then you'll click into, let's say, well, let's talk about the loans. I have the section is called Bulletproof Loans. This particular section only has the one lesson. Notice it gives me this progress bar here. It shows me that I've watched this video, but the other thing you can do, you know, and you can sort of do this yourself proactively, is if I go to the bottom and notice I've got very detailed write-ups on these lessons, you can actually mark a lesson complete, and it will track that for you. So it will show you how many you've got complete out of the total. So, I love that because I like that it doesn't sort of assume whether or not I've completed something. It lets me decide if I'm done, because I may have watched the video, but I may need to go back over it again, right?
So you can you print the write-up and then maybe add notes to it as you watch the video?
Yeah, the same as you would do just printing from your browser, right? So you can print the page, you know, just doing it the way you would print any web browser page. I don't know how clean this is going to come over. I honestly wouldn't recommend doing it that way. When I'm studying something like this, I actually use, for years I used Evernote. I'm back to using OneNote. So if it were me, I would have a notebook in OneNote called Bulletproof Bookkeeping with sections that followed suit with the sections here, and pages where I would make my notes as I'm going through. And you can certainly copy and paste the text, and you can right click one of these screenshots and, you know, and save it and add it into your own notes if you want to. And you can, of course, you know, grab the URL of any lesson and copy and paste that somewhere, just so you can, you know, keep track yourself somehow and quickly just click and link right into that lesson if that's the one you're working on actively.
And it's worth mentioning that in some of these courses, you have templates that you prepare sort of before the QuickBooks work in Google Sheets and that sort of thing, because sometimes you have to do some prep work or maybe do an amortization table, stuff that QuickBooks doesn't do, that you have to calculate outside, and you've already pre-built all those templates and given people access to those Excel or Google Sheet templates in it, right?
Yep. In fact, you're seeing an example of that right here. In this very lesson on loans, there's an effective interest template that you can download, and it's the very template that we're, let me stop my drawing here. It's the very template we're using in this video. So you have access to it because it allows you to just put in the loan amount, if there's any down payment, if you're doing this for a mortgage, right, then it comes up with the net amount you're actually borrowing. You put in the term in months and the interest rate, and it plots out the whole payment table. So now you have your monthly payments with breakdown of interest and principal. And of course, the video walks you through how I post that and why I do it a little differently than most people might.
Awesome. Let's play one of the lessons.
Actually, since we're talking about it, when you're in any lesson across the top here, it gives you what's called the breadcrumbs. It's the trail that shows you kind of what level you're at. So I can easily back up to just the subcategory or the major categories here. So let's go back there, and that's how I get back up. Let's go, there are a couple of really short videos in the banking and bank feeds one, right? So let's just do this one, bank feed automation with detailed rules, and it's only 3 minutes. So, and that was part 2. So the rules are done, and you can see everything's up to date. It's not going to have a bank balance to compare with if I didn't actually connect it to an online bank account. Remember, these were uploaded. But of course, I can confirm that the net of all the activity should be 317711 by going into my Excel file And I can just take the original, and the total should be that, accepting that I also put the beginning balance on the books. We need to take that into consideration. So this all nets out to, we can just do a quick sum here. Okay, 2169.85, but I also added in a beginning balance, remember, so let's go to the register. And now with activity in here, you can see exactly what that process looks like. So here, 5346.96, I can copy that, paste that in, and just see the difference, confirm the difference should be what we have as a balance now in QuickBooks, 3177.11. And the moral of the story is I always like to check my work. I always like to make sure it makes sense, right? And now I know that it does. And again, this goes to being bulletproof. Did I have to do that? No. I took every transaction, took excruciating amounts of time coding it all. And remember now, the next time I pull a download or upload a file in here, all these rules are now already created. So it will be a fraction of the work. You know, this was to do a whole month's worth, but most of us use the same. We pay for the same stuff mostly month in and month out. We're creatures of habit. Most of my meals are going to be at Gordon Biersch. So now in the next lesson, I'm going to show you how to kind of take this to the next step, right? We're going to organize and prioritize your bank feed rules. I've already mentioned a couple of times that the order of these rules matters. And here they're literally in the order in which they're created, and you can't sort them, right? You can either delete them, or you can search on the screen for them. And this is a browser feature. This is not a QuickBooks Online thing. But if I want to find where my rule is for Gordon Biersch, I can say Control F, which launches the browser search, and I can type Gordon, and it'll find it really quick. So more of that coming up in the next lesson. But just wanted to kind of wrap things up after having completed getting all the feeds in here. In the next lesson, we're going to start getting into digging into this rules table that we've now created and we're going to actually export it into Excel so you can see how you can reorder it and reprioritize it if, as, and when needed, and get it back in here in its new order. So make sure you're cool with everything we've done so far, and when you're ready to move on to the next lesson.
So that was it. And just to give context, you know, this lesson is after the longer, deeper lesson that walks you through how to create all your rules so you can get bank feeds coded very quickly. And this was mostly about checking your work. I don't know how well you could hear it. I assume the audio was pretty good because I integrated it.
It was fine. It was fine.
Okay. So you could hear it. Basically what I'm doing is I'm saying, this is the difference between compliance and bulletproof. Compliance would say, you know what, I imported it all, I've got my rules applied, I'm good, I'm done. Here in this lesson that you just watched, I showed you how you can go one step further to make sure it makes sense by checking the math and making sure you can arrive at the right ending balance in QuickBooks Online by just checking the spreadsheet and comparing that and doing the quick formula that I did. And that's the difference, going that extra step to ensure that the number is bulletproof. Now that 3177 and change, there's no question that's the right number. There's no question, nothing's missing, nothing is misstated, it's all there, and nobody can dispute that, and I can prove it.
And the important thing is, this is not just how to use QuickBooks course. This is, you're taking your time to stop and explain the logic behind why you made choice A or choice B. So that's the type of things that if that sinks in with the audience and they understand the logic behind it, they build this sort of second nature bookkeeping instincts. So when a new challenge comes in, a new type of client, a new industry, something that you've never seen before, it's handed to you, and your clients are expecting for you to know it, right? That you can actually apply sort of the logic and the source and be able to adapt to any situation. Would that be accurate?
100%. And if you noticed, I mean, you didn't see a whole lot of it. You saw the end result. But in the prior lesson that this was coming on the heels of, I've taught a ton of Excel. In these lessons, especially in the beginning bank feeds part, I wanted to give people every option, because you know what happens, right, Hector, with the bank feeds? I can go into one of my clients' files and all of a sudden the bank feeds aren't downloading. And I can call the bank and they're going to say, well, it's a QuickBooks problem. and I can call QuickBooks support, and they're going to say, no, it's a problem with the bank. And so what I laid out here in this section was every possible option so that if and when that situation arises, it doesn't have to slow me down a bit. I've given everybody the resources to know how, regardless of what's going on in the bank feeds, if I need to usurp that, I can go to the bank, get a CSV file, code it, and import it, and I can keep moving forward. I don't need to get slowed down a bit by getting caught in that kind of crossfire. So along the way, I'm teaching a lot of Excel skills, and there's some other apps that I touch on along the way, just wherever. These are things that I use when I do it. That's one of the reasons that I did the course, was because, you know, I'm not one of these people that just teaches it and doesn't actually have my own clients. I actually do this stuff for a living every day, and so I'm taking the stuff that I've used in my real life experience, that I use every day today in my real life experience, and showing it to people. This is how you do it. This is how you get it done efficiently, but more importantly, this is how you get it done accurately.
And comparing to all the courses out there, and we know that you're going to plug your course, and I'm recommending it. You're going to recommend your own course. That's obvious. But you're a very objective person, and I respect the way you talk about your competitors and the options out there. There are courses out there that are, let's call it, under $500. There's ton of them, tons of competition, and most of these courses are mechanical tutorials. They're not bad. They probably contain from A through Z everything that QuickBooks can do, or everything you can do in QuickBooks. And I would say most of them are good. You definitely want to look at the teacher. You want to look at the trainer. Make sure that they are practicing people, because sometimes they hire actors or professors to teach these things, and they go through a script, and the script is great. The person's great at diction and everything, but they're not practitioners, so they don't throw that little insight. Hey, listen, when you run into the situation, your customer is saying this, but they really meant to say this, and because of that, then you're sort of reading between the lines, and you're going to do things in a different way. And so that's what. So when you look at someone that's teaching QuickBooks or bookkeeping, you want to look for practitioners, people that do this for a living, that have been doing this for a while, because it will give you tons of insight on top of the mechanical transactions. Go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to throw something in there right on that topic, which is a few years back, I went in, and because I had joined a very popular online teaching platform, and they had a bookkeeping course, and they touted the fact that it was taught not by an accountant, but rather as a business owner who had to learn to do her own bookkeeping, and she grew to really love QuickBooks, and so she wanted to do the course. And so I was curious to see what it looked like from that perspective, and within the first lesson or two, she made a very, very bad misstatement about, she got her debits and credits backwards, talking about an increase to accounts receivable, and she referred to it as a credit to accounts receivable. And right there and then I stopped. I said, this is why, if somebody's going to teach the course, like you just said, Hector, it should be somebody who actually knows this stuff inside and out, because they practice it for a living every day.
Yeah, plus, you could argue, well, if this course is for people just getting started, people getting started are not accountants now, but they will become at some point, because you can't escape it. If you're in the bookkeeping profession and you know nothing about accounting or bookkeeping, and you refuse to know debits and credits and financial statements and all that stuff, and you learn how to do the mechanical stuff in QuickBooks, and you can do it well, at some point, people will ask you an accounting question. You will have to talk to a CPA. You're going to have to explain to a bank why retained earnings are higher or bigger than normal, and you have to understand these concepts eventually. So whether you come from an accounting background or a no accounting background, getting into bookkeeping, especially through the Bulletproof methodology, where you can explain, the logic behind every type of entry, you're gonna at some point learn accounting, and it's important to have those terms right from the get-go, even though this is not an accounting course, correct?
It's not an accounting course per se, but you're going to learn a lot of the fundamentals of accounting along the way by necessity. And obviously I agree with what you said, Hector. It is important to know this stuff, because you are going to need to be able to speak intelligently to the people who are going to be making use of your work. As the bookkeeper, again, you're doing the inputs, but you should certainly be familiar with the outputs that are resulting from what you're doing, which is why I did a video that I did that I'm using now very much as a precursor to people who want to sign up for this course. It's called Bookkeeping Basics with QuickBooks Online. And it's a 30-some-odd minute video that goes deep into debits and credits and actually shows you T accounts, because I feel it is important, if you're going to do bookkeeping, for you to understand what's going on behind the form when you're filling out forms in QuickBooks Online. And it's important to understand that that's really all QuickBooks Online or any accounting software is. It's a product that gives you forms that are easy to fill out, but behind every one of those forms, the minute you save a transaction, there are debits and credits being posted. In fact, you can go into any transaction and you can look at the journal entry behind that transaction in QuickBooks Online.
Okay, so excellent. So I described your course compared to the sub $500 courses, and that was, so the first category was the sub $500 courses. The second category is the $1,000 to $1,500 price course, which is where your course is. And then there's also a third category of folks that are selling to new accountants and new bookkeepers, which are usually $2,500, $3,000, $4,000, and there's a handful of folks selling these things to bookkeepers, and how, without really speaking negatively about them, but what is the difference between your course and the ones that are a much bigger investment? Is it that they spend a lot of time talking about marketing and developing your business? They're not hyper focused on the mechanics of QuickBooks, correct?
So first of all, I want to clarify something. This course is actually going to be a $2,500 course. I wanted to give a lot of people an opportunity to get into this course. So while I was building it, I sold it for $500. And then once it was completed, it went up to $1,000, which is where it is now as of this recording. And it's going to $1,500 soon, and then it'll go to $2,000 and then $2,500. And I believe that's where I'll leave it. So I want to make it clear, this to me is that $2,500. It's that third category of courses because it is that thorough and robust. And funny you should mention about some of the other courses out there. And of course, I'm not going to speak specifically to anyone. But one of the things that inspired me specifically to create this course is based on a conversation I had with somebody who has taken one of these other courses that you're referring to. And it is a course that's more focused on the marketing, and it teaches accountants and bookkeepers who are looking to start a career in that field, how to build and get high-ticket clients and all this. And what this person who had taken that course had shared with me is that a lot of these people are taking that course, and it's very effective. It really teaches people the marketing, and it teaches them how to get these clients. But what's happening is they're getting these clients and finding that they're in over their heads, and the clients are learning quickly that they're really only level 1 experience in terms of their knowledge of the accounting, because they've taken all this time to learn how to market themselves, but they haven't taken the time to learn how to actually do the accounting. They don't know the fundamentals. And so based on this conversation I had, I was inspired to create this course in hopes that somebody who finds themselves in that kind of situation, I've got the clients now, but I'm going to start losing the clients because I don't really know what I'm doing yet. You've got my course, and you've got me as a resource backing the resource so that you can get questions answered promptly within 24 hours, usually a lot faster. That's exactly why I built this course, was to help support people just like that. And I figure it has ancillary benefits to just the business owner who can't afford the bookkeeper and wants to do it, as well as even seasoned accounting professionals have signed up for this course and told me, even though they really know their stuff, the way my good friend Lisa always explains it is that she always gets some little nugget or something that I might mention in passing as a side comment, but she hears it and she says, oh my God, I didn't know that. And so she says, even for the experienced professionals, there's always something they can learn from me in this course.
And that's why learning from other practitioners is a lot more important than learning from a college professor. So Seth, let's wrap it up. I'm going to ask you one question sort of beyond the course and learning bookkeeping. If you will go back in time to when you first started your practice, what advice would you give your younger self about getting into this industry that would have saved you a lot of time, money, and frustration?
Honestly, the first thing that pops into my head when you ask me that question, what I would have told myself looking back is I should have charged more right from the beginning than I did, right? I was flying under the radar, and I was undervaluing myself big time, and I needed to do that to build the confidence. But again, looking back, knowing what I know today, I would say charge more. Charge more than what you were charging at the beginning. In terms of learning, I learned exactly the way I explained right at the beginning of this call, Hector, when you asked me the first question. And I said the best way to learn to me is to get the actual experience. And if anything, what I might do, in answering the question you just asked me, is I might go back to my younger self and say, you know what, you did the right thing there, by actually just focusing on getting the clients and getting the experience, making the mistakes, messing things up. I wish I had the resources then that are available now because of people like you and I, Hector. They weren't there in those days. This was like 2008. people were just getting onto YouTube and using it for business. But this is actually before 2008. Come to think of it, it was 2003 when I really started as doing bookkeeping and left the CPA firm where I worked and kind of got out on my own. And so if I had to give myself some sort of constructive advice, my younger self, it might be to not try and learn everything on my own, but actually look for resources that might shorten the learning curve. Because I really did struggle through a lot of it. Like I said, I knew the accounting fundamentals, and I spent a lot of time, reworking in my brain stuff that other people had already come up with. That if I took the time to look at other people's tutorials or maybe bought a book, it would have just shortened the learning curve, and I'd still probably figured out my own way of doing it the way I like to do, but it would have helped and it would have sped up the process.
Now, I'll ask you one last question on the first piece of advice, which had two ends to it. One is charge more, and the other one is get experience, right? Mm-hmm. And isn't that a chicken and an egg situation, right? Like, if I have zero experience, how am I supposed to charge more when I'm getting started or value myself more? And then if I'm too expensive, how am I supposed to get experience? So I'm going to tell you what my take on this is, and you tell me what you think, and we'll finish this mm-hmm. conversation. My take is, when you first get started, either charge the way that you should charge once you have the experience, or charge nothing. So that's my take. So instead of, I'm going to charge $10 an hour to be competitive, $20 an hour to be competitive, charge nothing, right? If you really, really want to, tell possibly your friend that's giving you, the opportunity to do bookkeeping on their business, to say, you know what, I'll work for free for 2 months to gain the experience. But the minute you put a price tag on it, whatever number it is, it's very difficult to go from $10 to $50 an hour, assuming you're going to do hourly, or from $100 a month to $500 a month. It's very hard to make that jump. But going from zero, which basically communicated that this is while I'm learning only, and it's obvious to both parties that this is a consensual relationship where you are going to save a lot of money by allowing me to make the mistakes, and then the mistakes are the ones that are going to teach me and give me that experience when I have no opportunity for immediate experience. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I do, actually. And so, as you know, I have a program where I mentor other accountants and bookkeepers called 97 and Up. And this conversation comes up a lot about what I should charge, especially from the people who are joining because they're new and looking for this exact guidance. And what I always say to them, experienced or not, is it's still the same answer to me. That if you're going to charge something, and I like the idea of offering to do it for free, although some people, but only if it's a friend, like you said, Hector. I think if somebody called me up from the internet and I started saying I'm doing it for free, I would be weary of that. I would be scared about somebody offering to do the books for free. But here's what I do say is I say you should charge just enough that it makes you a little uncomfortable asking for that amount. You should feel a little uncomfortable. You should feel like you're going just a little bit over your head in what you think you can get. And that's probably will get you in the right ballpark in terms of what you should charge. Of course, we have this conversation in our industry a lot. We don't recommend charging by the hour anymore. Start off doing simple monthly bookkeeping services and do it for like $250 a month, right? And that's your basic download code and reconcile service where they have a bank account and maybe a credit card, and it's a small business. And that's perfect to get started on and start learning how to do the stuff that you need to learn how to do. So that's sort of one answer that I have to the question. And the other answer is if you're negotiating with the prospective client, you can always come down. If you ask for something and they kind of balk at the number because they think it's a little more expensive, you can always offer to go lower. You could say, you know what, if it makes it easier, if it makes the difference between us working together and not, I'll do this, and you lower the price, right? But if you offer to do the work for them for a set price and they respond so quickly to jump on it because clearly it was a lot less than they were expecting, it's too late. You can't turn around and say, no, that was too easy. You know what, can we do more? It's never going to happen, right? So always start a little higher, if anything, because you can always come down from there. But you can't go up, right? Not until maybe a year later when it's time to do your yearly rate increase or whatever you're going to do.
Awesome, Seth. Thank you very much. And I'm going to go ahead and put a link on the description below, somewhere in the bottom, where you can click and check out Seth's course. I know he gives, you give a guarantee, right? You have a guarantee of some sort?
30-day money-back guarantee. If you get into the course and you don't think it's for you or you don't think it's what I promised, just let me know. I will refund 100% of your money within 30 days.
Can't beat that. Can't beat that. So thank you, Seth. I wish you much fortune continuing to sell this course. Everybody watching this video, check it out. The link's going to be down there in the bottom below. And I hope that you learn bookkeeping and you join me in the profession and join me on the battle for making business owners and entrepreneurs more successful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hector.